Just a week ago, I celebrated my 16th birthday alone, devoid of any party or celebration. My parents, in their usual indifferent manner, barely acknowledged the milestone before dropping a bombshell. I was to be kicked out of our family home. The catalyst? My older sister, Amanda, their apparent favorite, who at 22 was 7 months pregnant. In a house with 4 bedrooms, my parents decided I should vacate so the new arrival could have its own space. They presented this decision matter-of-factly, leaving me stunned by their lack of concern for me. Despite my low expectations, their callousness still managed to surprise me. They assured me they would continue to cover my expenses until I turned 18, but insisted I could no longer reside with them. I meekly questioned why the nursery couldn't be set up in the guest room, only to be told it was reserved for Amanda's boyfriend. It was a clear demonstration of their skewed priorities. My parents, Amanda and her partner, and soon the baby, all had designated rooms. Amanda's absence during this discussion seemed calculated to spare her guilt. Our relationship had always been distant due to the age gap, but I never expected her to endorse my eviction. Disappointed and hurt, especially on my birthday, I resigned myself to their decision without protest. Realizing that my parents' affection was beyond reach, I silently packed my belongings. They assisted, perhaps eager to expedite my departure. The car ride to my aunt's house was filled with their chatter, oblivious to my withdrawn demeanor. Upon arrival, they dropped me off without a hug or a kiss, leaving me to confront the reality of my familial rejection. My aunt greeted me with genuine warmth, appreciating my presence in a way my parents never seemed to. As we conversed, I confided in her about my disappointment with my parents' actions. Initially taken aback, her smile faded into a concerned frown as I recounted the morning's events. Without a word, she excused herself to make a phone call, leaving me to ponder her sudden change in demeanor. From the next room, I could hear her engaged in a heated argument, a rare occurrence for her typically soft-spoken nature. It was evident that my parents had stirred her ire. When she returned, her face flushed with frustration, I learned that my own father, her brother, had twisted the truth, claiming that I had willingly proposed the arrangement to accommodate the baby and was content with leaving home. My aunt, being single and uninterested in marriage or children, saw my presence as akin to having a roommate, easing any financial burden with my father covering my expenses. Believing that I desired this living arrangement, she readily agreed to take me in. It became clear that my father's deception had painted a false picture, manipulating my aunt's perception of the situation. Despite the betrayal, my aunt's affection for me remained steadfast, believing that I had willingly chosen to live with her. My aunt had initially agreed to take me in, but upon learning the truth, she called my dad to confront him. She was upset, and so was I. This situation felt uniquely difficult for someone my age. I'd always known my parents favored my sister, but this was extreme. They had lied to my aunt to cover up their actions, fully aware of how wrong it was. They prioritized accommodating my sister's boyfriend over my comfort, even though my sister could have easily lived with him. My parents insisted on keeping her close, even at my expense. Feeling deeply wounded, I made a decision to expose my parents' actions online. Uncertain if my aunt would support this, I waited for her to leave the room before pouring out my emotions into a post on my phone. In it, I detailed not only the events of that painful day, but also the long-standing unfair treatment I'd endured at home. As I typed, emotions overwhelmed me, and tears flowed freely. It wasn't just an exposure of my parents. It became a raw, emotional outpouring. After posting, fear gripped me, and I switched off my phone, dreading the repercussions. An hour passed in anxious anticipation, during which I attempted to distract myself with a book, though my mind couldn't focus. When my aunt awoke and rushed into the room where I sat, she calmly inquired about my post. Honestly, I admitted to her that I had indeed posted something, and our conversation ended there. Turning my phone back on, I discovered that my post had been seen by numerous family members, and my inbox was flooded with messages. Relatives expressed solidarity, offering support and encouragement. Their words lifted my spirits momentarily, until I braved my parents' messages. Filled with vitriol and anger, they demanded I remove the post. My father's texts were particularly hurtful, containing cruel words and even expressing regret for my existence. Unsurprisingly, my mother's texts echoed the same tone as my father's, while my sister's messages held a slight difference. She expressed a desire to speak to me in person, leaving it at that. Feeling overwhelmed by the flood of messages, I set my phone aside without responding to anyone for the next couple of days. However, I made the decision to block my parents, as I had no desire to engage with them further. While legally obligated to provide for me until I turned 18, I felt no need for further communication. My aunt supported my decision, and in the days that followed, there was no indication that my father attempted to contact her. We maintained a facade of normalcy, pretending as though nothing had occurred. Knowing she stood by me was all the support I needed. For a week, I distanced myself from my parents until the day they unexpectedly appeared outside my school. My friends, aware of the situation, formed a protective barrier around me as my parents yelled my name. Reluctantly, I approached them and made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with them anymore. Ignoring my refusal, my parents insisted that I accompany them home immediately. Confused by their sudden change in attitude, I questioned their motives. It seemed clear to me that their sudden concern was more about salvaging their reputation within the family rather than genuine care for me. Refusing to comply until they provided an explanation, I demanded to know why they were acting this way all of a sudden. Despite their evident frustration, they persisted in their request for me to return home. Concerned about my friends overhearing our conversation, they urged me to speak with them in private. Once alone, my parents revealed their true intentions. They admitted that their sudden urgency stemmed from my lack of response to their calls and texts. Furthermore, they disclosed that they needed me back home to secure their inheritance. The fallout from my online post had spread throughout the family, reaching even my paternal grandparents. Aware of their financial leverage, my grandparents threatened to revoke my father's inheritance if they continued mistreating me. They were warned that unless they made efforts to reconcile with me, treat me with kindness, and ensure my well-being, my father's potential inheritance would go to my aunt, who had been graciously caring for me despite having no obligation to do so. Losing this inheritance was not an option for my parents, given its significant value. While they had a decent combined income of their own, the inheritance held considerable importance. I understood their concern, but their attempts to frame their actions as a favor to me rather than a self-serving endeavor were transparent. Disregarding their pleas and protests, I made it clear that their inheritance mattered little to me. Walking away from their screams, I returned to my aunt's house, where I recounted the ordeal. Seeing her annoyance, she took action to prevent a repeat of such incidents. Contacting her lawyer, we began exploring options to secure my custody and ensure that my well-being remained a priority. Certainly, the legal aspect of my parents' rights over me would need to be addressed if I were to live with my aunt permanently. I expressed my gratitude to my grandparents for their efforts to resolve the situation, but I made it clear that returning to my parents' home was not something I desired. Having spent a few days under my aunt's care, I finally experienced a sense of freedom that had eluded me while living with my parents. Living with them had felt suffocating, and despite my hopes for change, nothing improved. While my grandparents didn't witness the reality of my home life firsthand due to living in a different city, my parents always presented a facade of good behavior during family gatherings and holidays. Beneath the surface, however, I was often overlooked and neglected, particularly after my sister's pregnancy. My presence felt insignificant compared to my sister's, and as time passed, I found myself increasingly marginalized. I shared all of this with my grandparents, and they assured me that if living with my aunt was truly what I wanted, they would make it happen. They promised to ensure that all my needs would be taken care of, even if my parents relinquished their rights. It was a relief to hear such support, and for a moment, it felt like things were finally turning in my favor. However, the peace didn't last long. Just a few hours ago, I received an email from my dad. It wasn't filled with hate or anger, but rather disappointment. He expressed that airing our family matters online wasn't necessary, especially when my aunt could have relayed the information to my grandparents. Now, not only were my grandparents upset with them, but they were also facing backlash and ostracization from relatives. He lamented that even some of his coworkers had become aware of the situation, tarnishing his reputation at work. In his view, my actions had caused unnecessary drama in their lives. Update 1. Firstly, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to everyone who took the time to comment on my post. Your kind words mean a lot to me, and I am truly thankful for your support. Now, let me address some of the questions that many of you seem to have regarding why I didn't leave my parents' house sooner and why I waited for them to ask me to leave, especially when my grandparents and aunt seemed willing to help. As I mentioned in the original post, I was never treated poorly by my parents. However, I often felt overlooked and neglected, which in its own way constitutes mistreatment. Despite this, I convinced myself that I was doing fine because I wasn't subjected to physical abuse or verbal cruelty. I had shelter and food, so I suppressed the need to feel loved or valued. The neglect had become so normalized for me that I didn't even realize it was happening. Additionally, I hesitated to seek help from my family because I didn't want to burden them. I'd also feared the repercussions if my parents found out. They place a great deal of importance on appearances, and I worried that seeking help would only exacerbate the situation at home. So, I suffered in silence, keeping everything to myself. Regarding my aunt, she didn't offer to take me in earlier because she didn't want to offend my parents, and she wasn't sure if I would even want to live with her. However, now that circumstances have led to this organic outcome, everything seems to be falling into place. She is currently in discussions with a lawyer to transfer my custody rights to her, although it will undoubtedly be a challenging process given the stakes involved. Since my original post, I received an email from my dad expressing disappointment in my decision to make our family matters public. He felt that it had caused unnecessary drama in their lives. However, my grandparents intervened, informing me that my parents would no longer bother me and reassuring me that I needn't worry about them showing up at my school or contacting me again. As for my sister, she reached out to me after my post, expressing regret for not speaking up on my behalf and apologizing for her role in our strained relationship. She explained that she had never felt comfortable confronting our parents and was shocked to learn about the living arrangement that led to my eviction. She had planned to move out eventually, but was forced to accelerate her plans after the fallout from my post. Despite the drama, she apologized for being a bad sister and pledged to support me moving forward. It's been less than a week since my original post, and I haven't heard from my parents since the email. It seems they've given up on trying to bring me back home, likely influenced by my grandparents. While I'm unsure of the details of their conversation, I'm relieved to know that my parents won't be interfering in my life anymore. Update 2. Just 3 days have passed since my last update, and today my aunt informed me that my parents have agreed to relinquish their parental rights. The necessary paperwork is in progress, and soon my aunt will officially take over the legal aspect of my custody. I have mixed feelings about this development. On one hand, I'm relieved that I'll finally have a home where I feel wanted and valued. However, there's also a sense of emptiness and sadness. It's strange that this is finally happening, but deep down, I know it's for the best. This is what I've wanted all along. Update 3. Hey, everyone. It's been a couple of weeks since my aunt became my legal guardian, so that's a positive step forward. I recently learned that my parents agreed to give up my custody because my grandparents gave them an ultimatum. They could either lose their entire inheritance or retain half of it, while relinquishing my custody and promising not to interfere with my life again. It's no surprise they chose the latter option. Frankly, I'm not bothered by their decision. It feels like I've dodged a bullet, and I'm glad to be free from their influence. I'm still in touch with my sister, though my parents are attempting to reconcile with her before her due date. However, she's requested some space for herself at the moment, urging them to stop pressuring her. It's almost comical how they managed to create such a mess in our family. Nonetheless, I'm content with my aunt, and that's what truly matters to me now.